What happens when a young African leader faces a ruthless reporter on live TV and turns the attack into a global moment of power and grace? Ibrahim Traoré didn't just survive the interview, he rewrote the rules. The studio lights were brighter than usual, the kind that turned sweat into a sign of weakness under pressure. Every seat was taken, the silence of anticipation sitting heavy in the air. People were not here for a casual conversation. They wanted fire, they wanted a clash, and they were about to get one. Ibrahim Traoré walked onto the stage, not like a man stepping into enemy ground, but like someone who had already made peace with whatever storm waited. Young, composed, his walk was steady. No bodyguards, no notes in hand, just a quiet confidence wrapped in simplicity. The crowd did not cheer. They did not boo. They watched, waiting. On the other side sat Thomas Grant, a seasoned journalist, famous for making even presidents stammer. His smirk was already in place, a smirk that said, "This is going to be fun." He did not rise to greet Traoré. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossed his legs, and adjusted his mic like a showman, settling in for a spectacle. The moment Traoré sat, the camera light blinks red. They were live. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thomas began, his voice smooth but sharp. "Tonight, we speak with a man who somehow became the face of a nation. Young, untested, controversial." He paused, looking straight into the camera before turning to Traoré. "Mr. Traoré," he said, "do you believe your country is a playground for revolutionary experiments, or are you simply enjoying a moment of accidental fame?" The question landed like a slap, dressed as a handshake. The audience gave a low gasp, barely audible, but enough to feel the tension spark. Traoré smiled, not the forced kind, the kind that showed he had already expected this game. "I believe," he said slowly, "every nation has the right to choose its dignity over its distractions." Thomas did not flinch. He leaned in. Big words for someone many still consider a temporary name in African politics. Some say you are more performance than policy. You think that is fair? Again, Traoré did not blink. His eyes locked on Thomas, steady, unflinching. "I think unfair questions reveal more about the questioner than the answer." The crowd shifted in their seats. The conversation had only just begun, but something was off. Thomas was ready for conflict. Traoré was offering none. And yet, it felt like Thomas was losing. Trying to push the energy, Thomas flipped through his notes with practiced drama. "There are reports, though unconfirmed, that your rise was supported by foreign influence. Some say even weapons passed through unusual channels. Should we believe you are a symbol of independence or a quiet puppet?" Traoré leaned forward for the first time. "Which is easier to believe?" he asked. "That a young African cannot lead without being someone's project, or that maybe, just maybe, we are capable of our own direction?" The studio was quiet. The live feed chat erupted in real time. People were not sure what to make of it. They came for an emotional outburst. But all they were getting was something more dangerous: composure. Thomas narrowed his eyes, signaling the control room for a short clip. The screen behind them flashed with images, protests, burnt tires, angry crowds. The kind of clips Western media love to run when talking about Africa. "Your first year," Thomas said, turning back. "This is what people remember: chaos. Do you call this leadership?" Traoré watched the clip, his expression unshaken. "I call that the sound of people waking up," he said. "Waking is never quiet." The camera panned to the audience. Some leaned in, some nodded. A few had their phones out, recording even though the show was already streaming live. A new energy filled the room. Not electricity, not conflict, but something deeper. Respect, not given freely. Earned. Thomas checked his notes again, his fingers pausing mid-flip. This was not how it was supposed to go. Thomas cleared his throat, trying to mask the slight tremble in his voice. He wasn't rattled, at least that's what he told himself. But Traoré's stillness felt like a mirror turned on him, and mirrors, when not asked for, were uncomfortable. He decided to shift gears, play rougher. After all, the audience loved boldness, and boldness often blurred into disrespect without consequence. "You speak like a philosopher, Mr. Traoré," Thomas said with a sharp edge, "but philosophy does not feed the hungry. Where are the jobs? The growth? Your speeches sound noble, but do they matter if the youth are still unemployed and the streets still bleed? A flicker passed through Traoré's eyes, not anger, but something deeper, a weight. He adjusted slightly in his chair, but still did not respond. He waited. Let Thomas go further. Encouraged by the silence, Thomas leaned in. And what about the military purges? He continued, voice rising. People disappeared, journalists silenced. Your government calls it discipline. Others call it dictatorship. This time, murmurs rose in the crowd. The word dictatorship echoed louder than Thomas expected. Some looked at each other, eyebrows raised. A few even frowned. The tension had shifted again, but not how Thomas wanted. Still, he pressed on. There are even whispers, he said, lowering his voice like a gossip in the market, that you consult with spiritualists before making decisions, that your mother, he paused for effect, still has influence over cabinet choices. The audience stiffened. The line had been crossed. Everyone felt it. Family was sacred, even in political criticism. And dragging a mother into this, it was not just unprofessional, it was low. Traoré's smile faded, but not into anger, into something quieter and colder. I wonder, he said softly, if your producers warned you where the line is, or if you decided there should be no lines at all. Thomas let out a small laugh. This is a free interview. There are no lines in truth. And yet, Traoré replied, truth without respect is just noise. The audience stirred. Someone clapped once, then stopped, unsure if it was allowed. The studio did not want applause yet, but that moment, the clap, hung there, awkward and loud. Thomas ignored it and kept pushing. You were 24 when you took power, barely older than a college graduate. Do you really believe your age does not make you a risk? That you do not need more experience? Traoré leaned forward, hands clasped, and for the first time his voice hardened. Experience, he said, is not just about time. Some people stay alive for 60 years and still never learn how to treat people. A soft murmur rippled through the audience again. Thomas opened his mouth to respond, but Traoré cut in. You mistake age for wisdom and aggression for courage. You think shouting hard questions makes you brave, but what you forget, he paused, is that the people watching are not blind. They know when questions are made to expose truth, and when they are made just to humiliate. That was it. No raised voice, no shouting. Just truth, wrapped in calm, spoken like a quiet verdict. For the first time, Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He reached for his water, but missed the glass slightly before adjusting. The audience caught it. Every camera caught it. That tiny moment of loss and control. Still, he refused to back off. Then tell me, Mr. Traoré, he said with a forced smile, if you are so calm, so wise, how do you handle failure? Because your first infrastructure project failed. Your alliance with neighboring countries cracked, and your own generals questioned your loyalty. Traoré looked at him, his expression unreadable. Do you ask that question to understand, he said, or just to wound? Thomas blinked. Because if you really want to understand, Traoré continued, I can answer, but if you want to wound, then remember something. He leaned closer. Some of us learned how to bleed quietly, long before we learned how to speak. A hush fell over the studio like nightfall. The crowd was no longer watching a debate. They were watching a shift, a moment that felt bigger than an interview, bigger than politics. Something else was coming, and no one was ready for it. The silence in the studio was no longer awkward. It was electric. It stretched out, thick and heavy, pressing down on everyone. Even the crew behind the cameras had stopped moving. Thomas tried to recover, tried to speak, but his mouth opened without words. Then Traoré spoke again, so softly that everyone had to lean in. You asked about failure, he said, his voice like steady rain. Let me tell you something. He did not look at Thomas now. He looked beyond him, at the crowd, the cameras, the millions watching live from their homes. His tone was not defensive. It was reflective. Humans. My first school had a tin roof. When it rained, we couldn't even hear the teacher. We would wait in silence, counting the seconds between the thunder and the drops. A pause. One day, the roof collapsed during class. No one died. But that day, I learned something. People are quick to fix what is visible. No one asks why a school had a broken roof in the first place. He looked back at Thomas, who was now quiet. You speak of failure like it defines us. But in my country, failure is a starting point, not a stopping one. There was no applause, just breathless listening. Let me ask you something, Traoré continued gently now. When was the last time you failed in front of the world and still showed up the next morning? Thomas shifted, cleared his throat. This is not about me. Of course it is, Traoré said. Because you are not just asking questions. You are setting traps. You want people to laugh at a leader who stumbles. But I did not come here to entertain. I came to speak for people who do not get airtime. A single woman in the audience nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. Something had landed, and it was not politics. It was true, raw, and deep. Traoré sat back, letting that truth hang. Then he continued, this time with stories. Real ones. He spoke of a boy who lost both parents to a militia raid and still showed up every morning to help rebuild his village with bare hands. He spoke of a nurse who walked 5 miles through mud just to deliver medicine to a child because the roads were too broken for cars. He spoke of elders who remembered peace like a story from another time and still believed it would return. This is the failure you see from the outside, he said. But on the inside, there is resilience, there is dignity, and there is fire. Thomas tried again, his voice lower now. But numbers do not lie, Mr. Traoré. Your GDP is down. Corruption investigations are up. Aid has been cut. Yes, Traoré replied, his tone like steel wrapped in silk. And yet, the people have not cut their hope. He leaned forward again. I would rather walk slowly with my people than run blindly with strangers holding a check. That was it. The line. The audience broke into applause, this time unrestrained. The studio director tried to signal them to stop, but it was useless. They were no longer an audience. They were witnesses. Even Thomas sat back, hands folded, his smirk long gone. Traoré looked at him once more, and this time there was no tension. Just calm power. You think this interview is about proving something, he said, but I did not come here to prove it. I came to remember. Thomas frowned. Remind who? Traoré stood slowly, not leaving yet, but changing the atmosphere. To remind the world, he said, that dignity does not shout, it endures. And just when it seemed like the tension had reached its peak, Traoré looked at the camera, his eyes soft. I once heard a story, he said quietly, of a foreign journalist who ran from war, afraid for his life. He was saved by a young soldier he did not know. That soldier gave him food, shelter, even helped him cross a border. He paused. No one ever knew his name. He never asked for credit. He just said, helping someone in fear is not charity, it is duty. The room was silent again, but this silence was different. It was filled with questions, with curiosity. Thomas's fingers twitched slightly. He knew the story, and now the world is beginning to know it too. The lights in the studio felt hotter now, not because they had changed, but because something unseen had. The weight behind Traoré's words was sinking in, reshaping perceptions in real time. Thomas's smirk faltered, his confidence cracking. His eyes narrowed, not in skepticism but in memory. It was subtle, but real. He leaned slightly forward, searching Traoré's face, now not for flaws, but for familiarity. You said, a journalist, Thomas asked, almost whispering, during a war? Traoré did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked up slightly, as if searching his own past. And when he spoke, it was not to Thomas directly, but the words hit him all the same. It was near the northern border, he said slowly. A foreigner, pale, dust-covered, bleeding from the leg. His press badge was torn. He had no food, no water, and he spoke French badly. The audience was locked in. He kept saying he was not a spy, Traoré continued, just a reporter who got caught in the wrong place. My unit was ordered to let no one through. But I disobeyed. I hid him in the back of a supply truck. I told my commander he had died. I changed his papers. And when the night came, I drove him to the edge of a refugee corridor and told him to keep walking and not look back. Thomas's hands were no longer on the table. They had retreated into his lap. His face had lost its color. There were no cameras then, Traoré said. No applause, just two human beings, one in need, one in position to help. He looked at Thomas now, not unkindly, not cruelly. But the strange thing about life, he said, is that it loops back, not to haunt, but to remember. A single camera zoomed in on Thomas. His lips were pressed tight, his fingers clenched. He knew. Everyone knew. There was no name spoken, no direct accusation. Traoré never said the words, "It was you," but he did not have to. The silence from Thomas was the confession. The audience felt it first. A wave of stunned realization washed over the room. Then the online audience picked it up. Phones buzzed. Tweets exploded. It was Thomas. Cheshire Traoré saved him. Tables turned. The story was already out. Not just the interview, the story. Thomas tried to compose himself. How long have you known? Traoré smiled gently. Long enough to know this moment would come, but I did not bring it here. You did. The weight of the moment pressed down on Thomas. His next question caught in his throat. His gaze dropped to the table, his bravado crumbling. I was desperate, he finally muttered. And you were human, Traoré said. That was enough. Another silence. But this one was not awkward. It was reverent. Traoré leaned back, his job done. He had not raised his voice. He had not attacked. He had told the truth. A truth that humbled a man who had come to humiliate. The studio remained quiet. No one dared speak. Even the floor manager forgot to cue the next segment. The world was suspended in that moment, as if afraid that noise would break something sacred. And in the middle of it all, Traoré sat still, calm, composed, unmoved. The silence that lingered after the revelation was unlike anything the studio had ever known. It was not tense, it was sacred, a kind of stillness that demanded respect. No one moved, no one whispered. The air itself seemed to wait. Thomas lowered his gaze. The man who had once smiled smugly into the camera now looked like a boy caught in a truth too big to deny. He did not speak again. There was nothing left to say. Traoré sat forward, hands gently folded, voice steady. We all forget things when we think the world is watching, he said, especially when we believe it will make us look strong. He turned again to face the audience, and by now, the camera operators knew better than to cut away. But true strength, he continued, is not loud. It is quiet. It is the moment you choose mercy over revenge, dignity over pride, and silence over shame. He let the words settle. In my country, we do not throw away people for what they did when they were afraid. We remember what they became after they were helped. There were no cheers, not yet, just eyes, wet ones, people looking at each other, some with hands to their mouths, some nodding slowly, processing what they had just witnessed. Traoré then did something no one expected. He stood up, not to walk out, not to declare victory, but to close the space between himself and the man who had tried to break him on live TV. He walked slowly to Thomas, stood in front of him. The camera caught it all. Thomas looked up, his expression almost childlike. And then, Traoré extended his hand, a simple gesture, a silent thunder. Thomas stared at it for a second. Then, without speaking, he reached out and shook it. The two men held the handshake for longer than protocol allowed, because this was no longer protocol. This was something else, something real. As they let go, Traoré said softly, "We help even those who try to humiliate us, because that is leadership." It was not a line. It was not a clap-seeking moment. It was the final truth. And that was when the applause came. Not like a burst, not like a wave. It started small, one person, then another, until the entire room stood to their feet, not clapping for a man, but for a moment, for a reminder, for the kind of courage the world rarely sees live on camera. The broadcast ended, but the world was already rewatching, dissecting, and remembering. Within minutes, the internet had turned into a firestorm. Clips of the handshake, hashtags about mercy, leadership, and real power. Memes of Thomas's stunned face. Replays of Traoré's calm dismantling of arrogance. News channels across continents aired it with headlines like, "The day Grace went viral, from soldier to statesman, how Traoré redefined leadership." He helped his enemy and won the world's respect. Social media was filled with messages from veterans, teachers, single mothers, immigrants, teenagers, ordinary people who saw themselves in Traoré's silence, his calm, his refusal to break. In classrooms, his story was replayed. In political rooms, it was studied. On street corners, it was talked about, not because it was dramatic, but because it was deeply, unforgettably human. As the credits rolled and the lights in the studio dimmed, one thing became clear. Leadership had been redefined that day, not by force, not by anger, but by grace. The man they expected to be humiliated had walked out taller, stronger, remembered. And the man who tried to mock him, he left changed, silenced not by shame, but by the weight of kindness he never saw coming. One calm reply. Millions inspired. If this story touched you, like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that show true strength and silent leadership. Let this message echo far beyond one interview.